Hello, we're just getting started now. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for joining. Okay, we got some more in. Hello to Tetovic and Arnaklam, or I guess Aru for short. Hello. Thanks for joining. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, I guess about how we can compose a spatial cluster. And I'm going to try to cover some of the topics that I brought up in a lot of the reviews this week. But first, I wanted to bring something up that came up for a few people during the assignments. It was it came up actually in last week's assignments, but it's something that might become an issue down the road as we work on future assignments. And it's a way of working that was shown in one of Amelia's well, the week 4 lecture videos, where Amelia was using a camera that was placed in the Maya scene file. And it was definitely useful as a way to keep track of the player viewpoint from the fixed perspective, the way the assignment objectives were laid out last week. But it might become useful this week as well, as we build out a spatial cluster and we consider the composition from each important node in the network. So I'm just going to quickly, this is a bit of a small technical issue I'm going to talk about. I'll try not to spend too much time on it. So I've created a duplicate of the new map that, generally speaking, is a good template to use when starting to build out your levels. It has the player character in it. It has all the game system stuff, including this camera. And I wanted to talk about this camera. What's interesting about this camera compared to the camera that we would use in Maya is a Unity camera is not a Maya camera, and vice versa. They're not the same. They share a lot of similarities, but they also some of the properties don't really either use the same units or they don't use the same descriptive terms to describe them. The biggest one that I see right off the bat is is this field of view. This is the main camera. It's called main camera in the hierarchy, and it's used by the whatever the, let me get rid of this. Sorry, I'm just trying to make a little room here. And I can't get rid of it. Okay, then. It kind of crashed on me. Nice. So anyway, yeah, this main camera is used by the game system here. It's a little odd also, in case you were wondering, like right what it's showing me now in the camera preview when I click on it, it's showing me more or less the view from, well, the default view and distance from the player character. When you run around the level, this camera is always going to be about this far away and pointed in the same direction that the player is facing. The strange thing is, like, when you move the cowboy in your map, like say you don't want him to spawn here, you want him to spawn over here. Well, the camera doesn't move with him. It gets snapped to him at that runtime when the game starts. It appears from testing it out. So the reason I'm bringing this up is oh, I guess Aru just will try rejoining. Okay. I actually already, the interesting thing is I already talked about this with Aru. So yeah, so the reason I'm bringing this up is if you want to always maintain like an idea of maybe where you spawn in and you want to know what the camera is going to look like, one thing you could do if you want, I didn't see any harm in it, you could take the main camera and you could move it to the cowboy. That doesn't seem to break anything as far as I can tell. But what this will do is, yeah, it seems like the camera is still okay. It's still like where it should be in the game during runtime. But the nice thing about this is now when you grab the cowboy, did I do that wrong? Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Now I think it should work. I thought it was put in the cowboy game object. Okay, so it's still okay. It's still in the right position. But my point of bringing this up is just that, now when you move the cowboy around, the camera will move with him in the editor window, which I think makes a lot more sense. It's a little weird to me that it's not included there. I don't think it breaks anything. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to bring up was in Maya. Now, when I talked about adding a camera, Amelia did this. Oh, good. I'm glad you have audio now. Cool. Okay, so yeah, we can add a new camera. Let's just do this. And we'll just call it, can we rename this camera? Yeah, okay, we'll call it, let's just call it like camera node 1, assuming we would put nodes throughout our level, kind of. This would be useful maybe if you're building in, well, if you're building in Maya, this could be useful. It could also be useful maybe if you're not even, maybe you could export this to your level anyway. So I'm going to grab the camera, let's see, and I'm going to try to move it approximately to where the player camera is. Okay, it's behind these cubes. I remember Amelia set this up in her video. But the thing is, I don't recall how she got the FOV about the same. So let me just, let me see, Shift J, rotate 180 degrees. I'll look at this again. I don't know, that's about, I guess, a little bit closer in. This is very loose, whoops, very loose what I'm doing. I never get used to the in-game or the in-editor view contextual menu, but there it is. Okay, so we have this, and then we save this, and now we have the other camera in the world that just popped in there. So it's still not in the right place, not quite. I guess we have to move it back into, yeah, just back a little, I guess, and down. I realize this seems a little bit tedious, but so if we go back, it's a little bit closer. I'll try one more attempt here to, let's look at it close to where it is. Pretty good, okay. So now if we go to our hierarchy here, and I just type in camera, there's camera node 1. So the weird thing about this, well, actually what I should do is one last trick. Actually, that's okay in that regard. But the thing that you notice is when you look at now, you look at camera node 1, you see its field of view is at 37.85, like that's the default Maya camera, which is odd. So what that means is if you do want to add a camera this way, you have to look at your settings in the default player camera to try to get roughly the same effect when you click on camera node 1. So we see a 60 field of view here. So it means you want to set up the same here. You want to set up 60. And that gives you like, well, this camera starts pointing down, which isn't a big deal. But what it means is if you do want to just view your, also the other thing that happens is if you have this camera in the world, I'm not sure exactly how Unity works or maybe this game system works, but it seems like it grabs, I don't know, it grabs maybe the last camera that you added to the scene. So what it means is you won't see the player camera, so you can still move around, but the player camera is not being used in the game window. So if you ever have this problem, that's why it's happening. Well, all we have to do to make this work is we can just turn off the camera right here, which is fine because it still works in the editing window. You can still grab it and see through it, but now when you hit play, if the camera is turned off, it won't be available to be used during game. So you can use the default player camera again. Although, see, now I'm wondering, Is it just me or did that camera seem closer? No, it seems about right. Okay. So yeah, that's just, I wanted to just cover that quickly. So the reason I bring this up is when we start building our level, which I'll finally start doing now, I'm going to work a little bit on a spatial cluster here. How do you add AutoGrid to any polygon I create in Maya? Well, the easiest thing is the reason Amelia gave you this, if you start building from this new map right here, new map.ma, it exists now as a pre-existing material. So in other words, if I start making a new polygon, let's see, I'll just start with like a cube. Okay, this is my new cube. You can now do assign existing material and it'll show up here in the list. I think it looks like it throws in this Lambert by default, but now you can just put in AutoGrid and it should, did it not do that? Okay, that's interesting, yeah. It does appear like it's not letting me do that. I mean, yeah, I normally what I do is I end up duplicating whatever's in the scene and it already has the material on it. But here it looks like it's not wanting me to do this, which is weird. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you why it's doing this. This is really strange. Material attributes, Lambert. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm normally not a I'm not a Maya guy, so I really don't know what goes on with that. I do know that like usually all I do is I end up duplicating like these meshes here, moving them around instead. That's probably the easiest way to do it. And this will work, actually this will work just fine. Because from here I know you can also just do a vertex color on this as well. If we do, yeah, like I know you can just apply whatever color you want this way. Like if I wanted just a gray, I could do that. Yeah, so I would, you said that's what I do, but for the last assignment I wanted to add a cylinder, but it didn't attach the color to it. Yeah, it's tricky. I don't really know why it doesn't let you do that. But I'd probably start from these objects. Like if I do cylinder, it's probably the same deal, right? Maybe if I do face mode, I grab all the faces. So let me do it this way. Let's see, there's one of the windows is Hypershade. Oof, okay, that just murdered my frame rate and then also killed my entire window. Okay, there you go. So did you see what I just did there? That seems like it just changed the texture. Did it or no? I thought it did. No, it didn't. That was weird. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you about that. That's not normally how I work, so I really couldn't say. Um, but I'm sure the internet can answer those questions as well. Okay, so I'm going to get actually back to. Let me just move this back to object mode. Delete this. I'm going to get back to the actual design of this space now. Okay, so our camera is disabled, right? Let's see, camera node 1. Good, all right. Okay, so I'm gonna start with building out. Like normally what I do is I just end up working with prototypes. It seems to work just fine. Let's see, the cube. That's not the one I use, or that is the one I use? Yeah, that's true. I mean, honestly, a lot of times what I end up doing with custom materials is I do end up applying one of a few like shaders that exist in Unity to a material even after it's brought in from Maya. But even that I don't do very often. I either use ProBuilder or I use a simple prototype, and I just do a lot of scaling. So yeah, so here's our basic cube. I'm going to bring it in here, and I'm going to start out doing a simple layout here. And one of the things I always try to bring up, working really simply with some really just primitive shapes to start. One of the things this helps you do is it helps you establish a composition early on. And it also, without worrying too much about the details or the identity of a building, like eventually one of the goals for this assignment was to establish kind of a thematic identity. And there are a few different ways we can arrive at that thematic identity. One is we can actually build out our building in such a way that it seems like it seems to represent like a style of a building, like architecturally. That's one way we can try to make that work. Another way is obviously just through kind of like prop decoration. And that's what some of like a lot of these prototypes that Amelia has, the vegetation, furniture, all that kind of stuff. So, but at this stage, I'm not really worrying about that. I'm not really worried about what the building is so much. And I mean, if you're working on a game, you might need to think of that more in advance. Like say maybe there's a story written for the Old West Town, and the story says there is a saloon. The story says there is a church. So you might have to think about that a little bit. But it's still at this stage, the most you should be thinking about, like when you're building in your basic shapes, is like say this is the saloon that you can see when you enter town. The most you should be thinking about is roughly how big would a saloon be in relationship to the player. Not really much more than that though. So in other words, like maybe I can, if I start off with, I start with this on the grid, I can say, okay, maybe compared to the player, the saloon it's 2 stories tall. Maybe there's like boarding houses, like places to stay upstairs. Maybe there's the actual saloon downstairs, maybe places for tables, that kind of thing. Then you could start to say to yourself, okay, maybe the saloon is like the interior is, well, let's say it's like 16 meters deep. So here's 4, 8, maybe 12. I don't know. Let's see what we get. 4, 8, 12. Well, close enough. Yeah. So, and then we say it's, we can play a little bit with the exterior now. But say we want it, we want to try to compose our space from our first like sort of node that we enter the town is, say it's like right when you enter the main square of the town, which is kind of what Amelia was getting at in the lecture. So we start thinking about how we present things to the player. And a lot of times when, let's say we have like a road, and the road in town is, we'll say this is our road. Maybe I'll make this a different color. and make it a gray or a light. Make it a gray, okay. Oops, that's white brown. What is it called? I guess that is it. Okay, that's good enough. That's just auto grid. Okay. So yeah, so this is our road, and when we enter the town, we want to be careful to try to present building facades to the player in a way that makes them seem easily accessible, gives you a good view of your choices. Like if you want this to have an interior, you know, then doing things like putting things at an oblique angle to the player, like at a 90-degree angle. If suddenly there's a door in here from the side, that's not very inviting. You're not drawing attention to it as an interesting place to enter. So that's where the 45-degree trick can be good. And it's good to do a lot of angling when you can. I brought this up a few times in a few different reviews this week. Let me find my Pinterest page. Yeah, Amelia had a lot of these examples of how you can orient your buildings in the town. Like, and this was one that came up. When we have this oriented to path option here, it might work in certain levels, but like in a place like a town, if you do this, you end up with these long straightaways. And if the player is walking down the street and you want to present where paths are to the player, even if there's streets that take right turns, it's not very inviting to the player to make a right turn. You're hiding a lot from them. If they start back here, you've occluded so much. If you do a 45-degree angle, this entrance into this new street seems wider because it's at a 45 degree from the player's viewpoint. That's why I find amongst these examples, a lot of these other ones are much more interesting to me. This one's more interesting. If we have our focal element here, if the player enters the space, we see like if they enter from here, they can easily see, they enter here and they can easily see like new paths to take around the building here, through there, through there. Things are just much more visible if they're kind of opened up a little like this. Or even like this here, if we have, there's a lot of occlusion here, which is nice. But also if we enter a space here, we start getting, we get more interesting and more, we get these entrances into new paths to new nodes at different angles. If we enter the space like here, or if we enter it here, we just get much more easy to read views of the area. Okay, so I had another question. I noticed another issue when I see your review. I always notice the prototype objects being deleted from the level. Even in this week, I had a few trees and a few other objects placed through the level in the review, but they were all missing. If you see the screenshots, you'll be able to notice the difference. Is this problem from my end? Am I doing something wrong in Unity? I just drag and drop them in the scene. It's possible. I'm not sure if you're using Maya objects in the scene. We're not using MA objects anymore. That could be part of the issue. If it's an, because I don't have, for instance, I don't have Maya objects in my directories, and I also don't import Maya objects from student assignments anymore because they cause a lot of crashing and slow down in my editor when I do that. So if you want to use those objects, if you're missing an FBX version of those prototypes, I thought I pretty much made FBXs of all of them, but if I didn't, let me know. In fact, maybe this week did I not do that? No, I did. There's yeah, that's right. I believe I posted FBXs of all the prototypes. But if not, for some reason, if you're seeing FBXs not showing up in the reviews, let me know. And I will make sure you guys get the FBX versions. We're currently kind of in the process of re-exporting all of the prototypes into as FBXs from the MA or Maya ASCII files. So that's just a guess. I'm not sure. That could be the reason why, though. Okay, so, right, so back to here. I'm just going to quickly do some blocks here. I'll make some smaller buildings. Like for the moment, I'll just sort of make this a big ground plane here. So you also might want to frame your shot. We talked about this a little bit last week in the composition composition assignment. Oh, this is a little low, isn't it? Okay, I missed that. In fact, I'll probably grab all this stuff and move it out a little bit. Get it away from there. Give me a little room to play. So say maybe we want to frame the view a little bit. So this is where we could include some large shapes on the sides. Maybe there's some kind of a building here as well. Or say we didn't want to actually put our, the other thing too that you can do in this Old West town, if you want to try to frame things a little differently, but you don't want to actually use buildings all the time to perfectly frame every kind of view of a city street, then you could also just work with you could have some other large props that are sort of like placed within the larger hierarchy of the town. Like say you want let's see, you want like a cart or something like that. Let's just make a new gameplay object and we'll call it let's see, we'll call it wagon. And then we'll drag just to make it a nice origin for this thing. I guess that's okay. This is going to be quick and dirty though, probably not exactly where I'd want it in reality. But for now, this will be okay. So I'll just start building within this wagon game object a little bit. And this just gives me like a prototype built out of prototypes really fast to just get my point across. Oops, I made that too small. And this is a little bit of basic detail, but I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple. And let's see, it's okay, there we go. I'm not going to bother making these actual wheels, but I'll make them cubes for now. Just to show you how basic sometimes your block out can be. The answer is pretty basic. I'll get a little fussy with this maybe. Sure, why not? I'm gonna go back to shaded wireframe so I can see what I'm doing a little easier. So now we have a really ugly wagon, but at least it kind of can help us establish what we want. Like say we want this as a bit of a framing element. We can now kind of move this where we want it to be to sort of block as much or as little as the view as we wish. So when the player enters the space, they see like building here. And actually this was a nice thing that Amelia did and a lot of people did also in their work was they made one of these the kind of buildings that are often seen on where they're created with some facets to their construction, I guess I could say. So the outer facade actually rolls at an angle, and it's funny because I mean these kinds of buildings were built with a 45-degree angle. So they created a rounded edge between streets. And it's funny, I mean, like they were built for the same reasons that we would build them in level design. They were built this way to make them inviting for people to go inside. So things really they're different. Sometimes they're different from reality to level design, but sometimes they're the same. Like the architectural reasons for this were the same as they are in level design. They were to make these more of an inviting option for people who might want to go somewhere within the town. I guess you could put a little bit of detail in here just so you remember what and why you built this thing. I should say why you built it, where you did. That's what I should say. So you could sort of start to indicate a roof structure here. Or maybe a balcony for later, just to sort of get a nice placeholder there. So yeah, so the player enters the space here. Let's see. Another thing too, like I find in some of these assignments, I find that the lines of sight are really big. So one of the things I'm going to try and work out here is I'm going to try to create a composition that avoids that as much as possible. So I think like this is at a 90-degree angle to the player, but because the player approaches it so close, I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think we still get a pretty good view of like, say we want the player to also have the option of going inside this building. You could create like a bit of like an implied entrance here with maybe a step on it. Maybe it even has a bit of like a roof. This is the kind of thing where when you're working on this and you're refining it, you definitely want to figure out your metrics. Like how high do you want like here, like how high do you want like a single story to be in the building? Like a lower story and an upper story. If we say it's like, oh, if we say it's like maybe 4 meters, then we can adjust that a little to there. I think that's a little high. I'll do 3.5. Then we can look at this and say, okay, is this about 3.5? And the answer is yes now, I guess, roughly. And let's try making this a little wider. In fact, maybe for now, yeah, I'll leave that there. That's okay. I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit perturbed by this. Oh, it's rotated. That's what's confusing me. Oh, I'm sorry about that. That was really strange. I didn't know it was rotated. It was messing with my sense of scale. That's another thing too. I think I might have mentioned this before, but the other thing that kind of throws me a little bit sometimes about, why does this keep rotating? Yeah, one of the things in Unity is they use, and it's different between different software programs, but Unity uses Y as the up axis, the up-down axis, and I'm more used to seeing Z as the up-down axis, but it's different in every program. Maya also uses Y as the up-down axis. So it's one of those things like, because I work normally in Unreal Engine and I work in Max when I do, I don't always work in Max either, but when I do, they both use Z. So I'm like constantly thrown by being asked to input a Y value. Okay, so 6, and then we'll do, that's okay, 6 that way. Now I'm going to redo this because I'm mental and it drives me crazy. 6.5. Let's say this has a small balcony on it. Now we can say this. We can play with the distance a little. I keep moving back to the player perspective because it helps me sort of figure out how I want this to go. And so we start playing with angles again. So maybe I could do like this building times 2, I guess, like that, but that gets a little weird. So I could angle it again. Let's just angle it again. This is my quick and dirty way of blocking things in, though. It's different from trying to model it out. Although really, like I've used ProBuilder a few times so far, and it seems all right too. If you guys want to do this in ProBuilder. So we've created some nice lines here that move the player around. They obscure a little. Still, if I want to avoid the problem of, let's see, of this kind of thing where I see down long paths, across different areas with their own identity. I want to try to keep my occlusion running. So like, this is nice so far. Like we're already getting a nice sense of this as a place. A lot of people use the like the well in the center of town. That's fine. I think I might just use my wagon here. Almost say like there's a wagon parked here in the center of town. Maybe the wagon was it was somebody who came to town to sell goods to people. Like he was a snake. It was a snake oil salesman or something like that. When everything got bad. Let me rotate this 180. Okay. So we could do that. It helps provide something else. It helps also, now that we place this here, it creates a little bit of another memorable anchor point. It also helps frame, if this is our entrance to the building, it helps frame it a little bit. I can kind of indicate that really plainly here just to kind of show that there will be an entrance here. Let's make it 2.5. Whoops, what was that? Okay, I'll make this 3. Maybe I just changed the color here just so it looks, this is what's nice about ProBuilder actually. Like right now I'm scrolling through all these textures, all these materials that exist. Often because of just students that turn in new materials, like this is stuff that you guys turned in. I didn't make these, but they're, if you use ProBuilder, it's kind of nice because you can just do new shape. I could say I want like something for my door, just like a rectangle for my door. And I can do, let's say like 3, 2.5, and then build it. And then the nice thing about that is, let's see. It starts off with this default texture on it. But I can very quickly just go under vertex colors, and I can just apply a new color to it very quickly, very easily. And even here, if I undo that, I don't use this default ProBuilder. I wish probably if you're able to alter the scripts in Unity, you can probably make it, instead of grabbing ProBuilder default as its starting material, you could probably make it grab anything you want to, is my guess. So like for instance, now I have AutoGrid, so all my stuff uses AutoGrid and it all like, it's clean and easy to read. Then I can just apply a black to that. That's the vertex color makes it even easier than just searching for materials. And it's pretty much moving a lot of the workflow out of Maya right like directly into Unity. And if I have more time, I might play a little bit with doing that more often, like showing a more workflow in ProBuilder. Although I usually just find in like a 1 to 1.5 hour demo, it's easier just to move blocks around like this, really. So is it a necessity to have a direct path to the end, or is it okay to make the player go through a few areas, say a few houses, in order to get to the center of town? Like The Last of Us does in most of their levels, they show the end objective from different angles through the course of the level, but you don't always get there directly. It's making the player enter one house to get to a different space due to the direct path is being blocked. Is that okay? Yeah, I mean that's definitely, that's like part of the mission design. Like mission design is kind of like a part of level design. Like they have a mission, they give you objectives in that game, right? We're kind of building a space much more generically here, and I'm building this much more generically. But even if we open up, if we go and we open up Amelia's level, let me do that really quick. That's a good point. Let's see where she saved that here. Under scenes, week 5, is it there? Nope, maybe here under, think it's here, right? Okay, good. Right, so she built this level, and you're right, there's a whole lot of paths through here. It's very open-ended. But one thing sometimes it's done, and this was done a lot in, well, if your game is more art focused, sometimes, uh, like we had, for instance, when we worked on BioShock Infinite, we had a lot of spaces that were built. Um, the primary goal at the start might have been more to make it like hierarchically realistic. What I mean by that is they thought about the organization of a city, and they thought about, for instance, where a church might be, where a building might be, where businesses might be in relation to each other, where civic spaces would border commercial spaces, would border residential spaces. Like they thought of all that. So, I mean, you could, in this level, for instance, you could definitely have something where if for instance, the workflow in your studio means that the art team is going, or a different mission design, a different level designer is going to build the space, and then you have to plan the mission in it. Well, then what you could do then is you could decide, you could look at the layout and say, okay, where do I want the player to go through this level? You could decide that eventually you want them to end up at this tower, but they enter town. I'm trying to think how this could work. They enter town through somewhere else, but you don't want them to be able to get here directly. So you could end up blocking off certain things. You could end up like blocking this direct path up even if you wanted to. So if I just go to standards, yeah, you could end up doing something where it's actually blocked here. And say you want the player to have to like find a new way up. Depends kind of where you're spawning. Say maybe you're spawning back here. Maybe you spawn back here. You come through here. And you can see, like, as you enter this space here, you can see like your objective is there. Let's try it this way. Now let's say you do enter through, this is the, maybe the original entrance to the town. Yeah, so you spawn kind of here. So say like this is missing. Okay, let's say it's missing by that, by that way. So you enter here and you see like your direct route is blocked there, but you can see the path up. Or maybe even you can kind of go a little ways in and maybe your path is blocked up ahead. Like that. Maybe it's not even blocked like by actual geometry. Maybe it's blocked by dangerous enemies or something. So you have a patrol of enemies that you can't possibly beat, like maybe an armored machine gun truck or something that you can't possibly get around, but it's blocking your way there. So you could go up and you could kind of I don't know, maybe you could even, yeah, maybe you actually can even get to here and you can see the tower in the distance, but then you can't get there. So then you're forced to find another way up, and then maybe the way up is actually like a secret door back here through this level. Or maybe there's another path this way. Like you pretty much end up closing and opening paths through the level to make you move through it. Maybe the path is here, but there's also a blockage like that you makes it so you can't get through this way either. So you end up sort of gating the player where you want them to be gated or completely blocked. And then maybe you want them to force them through the church because there's a back door in the church, like right, maybe there's a back door like that leads you out the back here. So you just sort of have to think about the whole space, and you have to think about where there's opportunities to traverse the space. You have to think about the way it's built and where you can see your objective. Like if this tower is the objective, you might have to say like, where can I move through the space, but still see the tower. And then, you know, you might have to go back and forth with like a level artist even to sort of move things around. Or if you're the one who got to actually do your block out of the space, you might say, I need to see the tower from here even. So then you might have to do something like, you might have to make it so that there's like maybe a staircase that leads up here. Or a ladder if your game has ladders, that could work too. So like I was saying, maybe your blockage is here. Or better yet, let's see. That's extremely steep, but let's see. We can make it a little more inviting maybe. I think my snapping is actually making this harder to do. Yeah. So this would obviously have to be massaged a little bit to make this like not such a weird place to get on a stair. But yeah, in fact, I probably wouldn't do it that way. Or if I did it that way, I'd make the blockage a little bit closer so you can see where you can't go, but then you can see like a way up. Like maybe there's guards down here, but now you can actually go up here and get to the roofs. Then maybe crawl across the roofs and get to the tower, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's just I think you just have to sort of look at your layout and figure out oftentimes you end up building something specifically like in a realistic way where it seems to like follow a realistic flow, an architectural sort of flow that you'd find in a town, even in inside in the interior of a very large building. I recently worked on a level like that where there was kind of an opera house, and it was built kind of like the uh, the opera house in Paris, and you know, it had a realistic layout to it. But then we decided where we wanted to close off certain areas and alter a little bit to pretty much suit the needs of the mission objectives. But is it okay for the player to feel lost then because he gets a sense of accomplishment when he actually finds the way in the end? Do I have to always guide the player to the end or just go over an open design, even in a linear game? Yeah, that's kind of part of the game design. Like, I would say if you bring up Uncharted as an example, you're usually not lost for very long in that game. They don't give you too many choices. Uh, and when they do, a lot of times they sort of make it, they sort of even split the choices. Like if you have kind of a climbing puzzle in Uncharted, a lot of times you can go like a little bit to your left or a little bit to your right, and you'll find different handholds and they lead you up to the same area. They have certain parts of the game that get more difficult, and they really try to make them like a puzzle. But most of the game, like if you're just pushing forward, they often have two small routes that lead you forward. There's not a lot of they usually don't do, or I should say they kind of never do dead ends, like where you actually reach a real, you go a long ways and you reach a dead end, you have to turn around 180 degrees and like go back. That's not something you tend to do. Like for instance, right here, if the path to the tower was not this back route, um, they they wouldn't they wouldn't force you to go like all the way to like there and then block your route and then make you go all the way back. If they did that, if they made you go all this way, they'd very likely provide another way back. Like even here, um, with this idea, if you're trying to limit that sense of like sort of failing or being lost, if the player reaches there and they're like, oh, I can't go back there, I can see back there, but I can't get back there. And obviously this staircase isn't really doing what I want it to at the moment because I could jump over the wall, but at least you're aware of like, oh, now I can just at least loop back this way and get back to the main area and look for another way through. And if I keep looking, I can eventually at least find, like, if this is a way through, I could find this. But yeah, it kind of depends on the game, on the scale of the game. Like in a game like, trying to think of games that get difficult to do that. Like, well, like Fallout 4, like I played a lot of Fallout 4 and they have very different goals in their game. They're trying to build a really large world where everything, the buildings are, they're often built in kind of a generic way so that they seem like, they're built more to seem like, sometimes they're built very specifically to uh, to suit a mission design, but more often than not, they're built more just to sort of recreate as realistically as they can, an environment that would exist in reality, like a quarry or the interior of an office building or the interior of a factory. They build their levels like that, and I find there are a fair number of times I get lost in their interiors in that game, because they're just kind of, they're building them as a giant space. Like exploration is a big part of like an RPG or a Fallout game. You explore, you find loot, you explore, you find loot, you run into enemies, you shoot them, you get more loot. So I think they don't really care as much if you get lost. I found a lot more dead ends in games like Fallout 4 even. So yeah, I'm just going to go back to my my demo level. Let's see, which was, sorry, I'm just trying to navigate back to it here. No, was it there? Yes, it was here. Okay. I'm not going to save that. So, okay. So I was talking about a little bit about how we want to block the player's view. So for here, we could do a few things. We could, I mean, I like to make my life easier if I can. I like to actually block off the streets. Let me turn my snapping back on. So to make my life easier, I could actually block things like this. I guess this is, no matter what I do, it's okay, well, gray's a little better. Just looking for a color that isn't brown. It still helps me see the ground a little bit better. Messing around here. Too bright, too bright, too bright. These are all kind of bright. I guess I'll go with dirt. Dirt always works. Although I don't like that because I can't see my colors. That's odd. Guess I'll stick with this then. Okay, so if this is kind of my spatial cluster, again, I'm going to play with more angles, try to make things like face the player in more interesting ways. Again, I'm not so much. I'm trying to at this point I'm trying to get away from making the level obey like a grid kind of plan that you might think of being in a town. I'm trying to just make it interesting to walk around and have things like obviously visible to me. I'm trying to avoid long lines of sight, like right here. Already this is kind of bothering me a little bit the more I look at it. I think what I'd rather do is I'd rather block off my view of the street down there. If we think of this as a street. And one of the things I don't know if I mentioned it, but I mean, a lot of times if you look at references of like, say, old West towns in America, which is this assignment was kind of based on, you find pretty quickly that, let's look for Pinterest here. Let's do old West town. And you see like how boring they are. I mean, they're really like overly simplistic. And I realize some games that go for really hardcore realism, like say like a Red Dead game, they get really, okay, did that just not bring up anything? That was odd. Okay. So yeah, this is great reference, obviously, but many times I'm looking for an example. This is a pretty good example. Yeah, so for as far as realism goes, you can see like a lot of times they were just rows of buildings that were very little around them. But I feel like if you're building a town for a game, like you can do this. And like I said, Red Dead has towns like this, but Red Dead also has like Red Dead Redemption or one of the Red Dead games. They have these like large open spaces where you can ride your horse all around. And so it's kind of different there. But I think in like a first or third person perspective game where the movement's more slow, you want to use more occlusion. You want to try to do some things that are more interesting in the layout. I think it was like, this is another example here where you have these long straightaways a lot of times. Same for here. I think there was one example that was kind of interesting, but they still have really long, here's a nice curve in the road. I don't know if this is real or not, but it's like a recreation of a town. There's a nice curve in the road. I feel like the scale of this though is like you can still see way too much as you walk through this. This is probably much bigger than you'd build it in a game like for our cowboy character. So I'd still like use nice curves like this, but I'd exaggerate them a lot, and that's kind of what I'm doing here in our town. here as I'm building it. I'm just really exaggerating the curves. In fact, I think now that we have that there, we could probably delete this. And if this is a corner building, it would probably be taller, so I'll make it taller. Yeah, let's make this like maybe 1 or maybe 0.5. I don't know. I never found it what I thought was the perfect height for a balcony, but it wouldn't be very thick. So like there's your view from there. And also like say there is another street back here that you can see all the way back to. And there are more buildings. Sorry, let me just I'll duplicate this and move it back. Maybe not that far. Just a little bit. So yeah, I was just going to say maybe there's some more buildings back here, but you don't really want the player to see so clearly all the way back to here. So yeah, say maybe we want this to be kind of a new district back here. With its own sense of identity. Behind this main building there. So I'm going to try to minimize the view back there. So again, we can just do, this actually gets kind of narrow. Oops, I'm not sure what just happened there. Okay, so we can just do like things like this again. Just find ways to sort of partially occlude the space. Or it could even be like, we work with foliage maybe a little bit. Maybe the oak tree and this wagon become, you know, sort of occluding elements or something, or framing elements a little bit. Now, even if we move this back a little, we sort of framed it a little more on the right-hand side. Oof. And we could do small things like, is it town? There we go. Or we can, yeah, we can just grab like the barrels. We can put a few barrels in here to sort of do more framing. Say somebody stacked barrels on the corner there. So by doing this, this is something, another thing that's useful about doing things like this is you're not only are you creating kind of like a visual element that helps sort of make the player, or helps the player create a mental map of the space, but you're also sort of creating like a gateway. Some people you can make a literal gateway if you want to. I mean, you can like where the player starts, you could literally make this. If the player starts back here. Mhm. And some people did this too. Like you can get really heavy-handed with it if you want, where you actually build an actual gate that shows like you're entering now the main town square, and you actually build this. Yeah, we could do it this way. Where you really just drive home the fact that this is an entrance to a new spatial cluster. But I feel like when you get up here to this point, like we frame it also with like this collection of objects on the left and right, and now it seems like when you pass through this threshold, you feel like, okay, now this has its own like identity, and you theme this with its own either narrative identity or architectural identity or whatever you want, really. You just have to think about every time you enter a new scene, like say, I consider this when the player rounds this corner and they're here, you ask yourself, okay, what do I want them to see when they enter this space? Like, what's the composition from this place right here? And then the same thing goes for where we started in the level back here behind this gate. We think of what do we want the player to see when they enter the space here. We said, oh, we wanted them to see this door to the saloon because there's a murder scene, the remains of a murder scene we wanted them to witness inside. So that kind of thing is there. Yeah, we just have we do things to draw guiding lines the same way we did in the last level. Like right here, this I should say last week's assignment. Like right here, we have this wagon and this wagon. They kind of push our view from the right to the left toward that door, and also to some extent the perspective lines created by like this overhanging balcony. They're also pointing us in that direction. And we can see the path in the distance, but we're not seeing into the new area behind here. We're using occlusion, we're using some framing elements to show that there's something beyond this threshold right here. So yeah, so when we go back here, we can start to think about what do we want to see once we reach this spot. This goes back to where I talked about adding a camera in right here. I wonder if can I duplicate this camera? You can. Weird, you can duplicate a camera that you added in Maya. That's weird and scary all at the same time. Um, but if you wanted to make it like remember things for yourself, you could just like you could keep placing cameras where you want to like think about what does this look like when I enter this space. Like you could place it right where you think the player should be seeing things. In fact, I wonder, it's too bad you can't pin this this camera in Unity. I don't think you can though. I don't see any option to do that, but again, leave it turned off here so you don't kind of screw up your playing. But once you have this set up, then you could say to yourself, okay, well, I want a focal point over here in this part of town. What's it going to be? And you could say, I want it to be like a building on a hill, maybe. Like now, perhaps when the player reaches this point, the road now goes up a hill. In fact, maybe I guess what I could do is I can lock my view on this, right? So it's always selected. Yeah, okay, so that's the best you can do. I guess you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have your properties of the thing you're grabbing and then also have your camera view stay up on screen. Like you can do that. I know you can do this in Maya. I'm kind of imitating what Amelia did, but I'm doing it in Unity with the camera preview like stuck to my window there. Hope that makes sense. Let's see. Yeah, sorry, the snapping's kind of messing me up a little bit now. I like snapping when it's useful though. So yeah, let's just do this. Maybe there's now in this part of town, there's kind of a plateau of sorts. Maybe the buildings kind of rise up at this point. So I should turn my snapping back on here. I don't know if it really matters that much. Just when we're messing around. So yeah, now that maybe we can see down the street, now we work on, maybe this is the church in the town. So we can see in our camera view here, I'm just like building a composition now with the church at the top of the plateau. What the heck? Let's see what I'm doing here. Okay. Oh, I'm still on global. That's why. Yikes. It's my very quick and dirty church. I want to point out from here, like probably the next phase, like once you get you get all your compositions laid out in the most basic form that you can, you probably want to just you can go along and you can kind of refine each building. You can, once you have the basic layout, you can make sure your metrics are okay. Make sure, like if you're building this to architectural standards, you can say, you know, your doors are a certain size, you know, your windows are a certain size. If you have standard like wall dimensions, like in sort of modular methods, like maybe your wall, each wall is like, I don't know, 2 meters wide by 4 meters tall, that kind of thing. You just make sure like each of these buildings is sort of, they obey metrics. They don't have weird dimensions where there's really random distances between like doors and the edges of buildings and stuff like that. You want to make sure that's all okay. But the nice thing is you'll have established your footprint quick and easily working this way. Your scale will feel good. Um, yeah, so that's probably the next phase before you actually go in and say like, say you want to model out the interior of this space. Like now you know at least like when you have it all set, you know, you have a pretty good basic idea of the overall volume that the shape will take up, the overall amount of volume. Let's see, move this over a little. Okay, and let me just grab another tree. You can kind of frame the tree or frame the building with some trees. And again, if you build a building out of pieces, it's best to, like I'm doing, in this kind of sloppy way, I would probably make sure you, yeah, you place all these individual meshes in a gameplay object of their own. It's getting a little bit fussy here, but I'll just save this and have a quick look. See how this camera, like, if it's accurately representing the player camera when we actually run into the space. Yeah, so you're on the corner and yeah, it's rough, but at least you can see, like, if you keep thinking of all your key locations you want the player to experience a composition in the way that is useful to you as a designer. If you just think of all these places in your node network where these things are important, then your level will turn out much stronger. If I also go to, also in Pinterest, let me go back to spatial composition. Yeah. Yeah, this is really important, I think. This idea of a node network, like I brought this up in most of the reviews this week. What I was doing there, like when I thought about how the player sees the church on the hill, for instance, I think about like, you have to think of like all these interconnected like spaces that you sort of, you close them off, you close them off, you kind of frame them separate from each other, you separate them almost by like corridors. That's kind of what I did here, like in this level, like this is almost a corridor. If you say like this is one of those large spots, this is a node, or I should say this is its own spatial cluster, then you move over here and then suddenly if you round the corner and you go through this kind of corridor, this now becomes like a node. And from here, like say maybe we want the player to go up the hill, but maybe we also want to make it clear that there maybe is an interesting path like through here off to the side. And I'm being really lazy. I wouldn't use wagons for all the stuff I'm doing, but at the moment I am. Yeah, so now when the player comes here from this node in the node network, they now have a very clear like choice, like I can go up there or I can go down here. And maybe both these, if this were uncharted, oftentimes you might be given this choice and it might turn out that over here there's a small spatial cluster or a treasure to find, but then there honestly, it wouldn't surprise me at all to find that, you know, there's also like a little path that leads up to the church from a different angle. I could easily see that being a thing. Yeah, I could very easily see that being a thing. See how that might work. Aru asked, will this work be ongoing for the rest of the course? No, this assignment, this dealing with spatial clusters is it will go on for next week's assignment as well. The main goal of this week's assignment was to think about how you compose like one spatial cluster, like to give it identity, to give it a sense of a good flow, and then to sort of how you can link multiple spatial clusters. So like already I'm kind of expanding a little bit beyond. I'm adding like an area way over here. I'm adding a possible area in this sort of back route over here. So I'm definitely kind of mixing it up. I didn't realize this was never really rotated properly. Shame on me. Anyway, I think we get the idea. Where's my camera crooked? I don't know. It's weird. I guess. Oh, that's right. So what happens when we lock our camera? I need to unlock that, don't I? There we go. Now we see the rotational issues. So yeah, it can be useful. You just have to remember when your when your stuff is locked, or else it can become pretty painful, I think. Just trying to think how we can get a path down from here. I guess that'll work. Yeah, so now the player goes here and we can present another part of town where we also hide this little path here. So yeah, we just keep framing, and I find not always, but like I like to use occlusion like this when I can, where you sort of you block the lines of sight between each cluster. You really, the main focus is you try to find creative ways to block these early lines of sight. And just separate areas from one another. Even here, I might even this might be more of a straightaway than I want. The way I can see across it, that's already kind of bothering me. Yeah, so really I might even think of another way that I can tweak that a little bit. Might be as simple as adding another building, or maybe not. Oops. But yeah, just never underestimate the usefulness of just working with large cubes. Helps you establish things really quickly. Then later you can just go in and, like I said, you can decide what these cubes are. Maybe like depends, because this is like, as Amelia described it, she said it's a mountain western mountain ghost town. So I mean, some of these could be buildings. Like this is obviously a building the way I built it. So is this one. This probably is. But then by the time you get back here, honestly, this could be like, this could not even be buildings anymore. It could suddenly, you just suddenly make angles, you know, and voila, you have, you now have an indication that this is like rocks or something. Just kind of mess around with it, and suddenly you can tell this is rocks. And honestly, being able to use landscape to build your environment, it's much easier than having to plan out everything out of man-made structures, out of buildings and such, out of things you'd actually find in a city. It gets much more difficult. But like I said, that's suddenly me moving on to step two. Like I had my block. Now I said, what is that block? Well, it's a natural structure. And then I could say, I could suddenly decide how much more do I want this all to be a natural structure. On the one hand, it helps create more of a sense of identity when I suddenly see like these are rocks back here. Now suddenly this because this is a natural kind of environment, this now doesn't, it feels different from the rest of the town because it is. I mean, there's now rocks in it instead of actual, you know, instead of actual structures that were built by someone. This is just me messing around with it to give it more of an organic feel. And that's the thing, is that's what's great about having natural structures, and that's why you'll see them in a lot of games, especially multiplayer maps. They just help justify a lot more things that you might want in your level when you can suddenly just change the terrain to suit whatever form you want. So yeah, it could be like this is a rock at the edge of town, but maybe there are some more buildings back here. So maybe you come around this way, and now you can think about, again, you can think about a camera you want to place here to keep an eye on your composition of this spot and whatever buildings are back here. Or maybe one of the defining characteristics of this area back here is there's another elevated part of terrain back here. So you could suddenly do that. See, now you also, this is really convenient to you. You get the sense of like a new area, like you suddenly build a new plateau back here and your life is easier, because that like automatically that helps the player map out the space a little better once they can, they feel like this is now a distinct area separate from this area by virtue of them going up into it. Like I said, now you could have more buildings back here that suit any kind of plan you want, really. So yeah, that's about all I have for this week. I just wanted to sort of give you some a little bit of insight, if I could, into some different kind of workflows you could have, some like quick ways to sort of visualize your space on a high level before you get into all that detail. because I know in Amelia's sample assignment, there's a lot of detail in that one spatial cluster. And it's harder to add that detail once you've, it's harder to alter this overall like node network you've created here. Once you've created all that detail, it gets trickier. Like now you built a building to an exact scale that's architecturally sound and all that, but now you can't move it so easily because maybe the footprint, the whole interior of this building is based on the whole volume you've already created, and you can't really change it now. The other thing too is just for ease of use, as a grouping mechanism, I brought up this idea like here on the wagon. I would definitely do that. Like say for instance, I was building like say this saloon or whatever, this corner building. Like I said, I still wish Unity had a quick and easy way to like grab a bunch of objects and then just right click and say add to new empty gameplay object, but they don't. So you have to do this first. You have to go create empty, and then you have to rename it whatever you want. You could even just name it building 1. Like say we don't know what this building is yet, so we say, we just say Main Street, main building, like it's sort of the focal point. And then, just make sure, like, the cool thing is once you have this gameplay object selected, once you start adding things to it, where is it? It's way down here now. It's way at the bottom probably, right? Yeah. Now, at least if you do have to tweak it, it's in this gameplay object, and despite this really horrible, and normally I would have made sure this wasn't such a terrible origin point. In fact, I'd definitely make sure it isn't such a terrible origin point before you do it. Yeah, I would probably, place your gameplay object in a place that makes sense. Even if it's not perfect, like my snapping's off again, isn't it? Okay. At least it's on the grid, kind of, right? I can kind of get a sense of where it would be snapped. It's fine for now anyway. I guess that does it, right? Yeah, okay. So at least now you can just quickly grab your large building and move it around. And again, this is, I'm not sure what the same equivalent is for working in Maya, but obviously it's a good idea to group your objects in Maya the same way. However you need to do that, just so you can quickly and easily move them around. I don't know if it's like maybe a hierarchy of elements or what it is. I know how it's done in Max, but not Maya. But yeah, I would definitely make sure that you can quickly move things around. But again, it's more useful when you're at this early phase and you're just blocking out the large volumes and all the relationships between them. The sort of spatial dominance subordinates kind of relationship is good to establish with the big blocks. Okay, I think that's about all I'm going to cover today. If you have any questions, we'll be talking more about this next week. A lot of related topics next week. I'll probably just be building out this space more next week. Probably not with more detail. I'll probably maybe a little more prop dressing, so we can talk about like different ways of getting thematic identities. Probably be dealing with that a little bit more next week. But yeah, just try to keep this stuff in mind when you work on next week's assignment. Okay, bye guys. Thanks for showing up.